First of all, though, let's run through those front pages. As you can imagine, the conference does dominate, and a number of key cabinet ministers have been out and about, basically talking about what they think this conference should bring, what they think Rishi Sunak should do, about all sorts of different issues. And let's bring in Nigel Nelson now, GB News' senior political commentator, former political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, to talk us through them. Nigel, how lovely to see you in Manchester.
You too.
We made it despite the train strikes. We did. We got up here last night. We've had some breakfast. We've gone through the papers. Let's get started. Now, I've called this section Who Can You Truss? Because there are a lot of stories in the papers about this caucus of Tories, very much aligned to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, signing this letter at the beginning of conference, Nigel. I mean, it's the last thing Rishi Sunak needs, basically saying we will not support any budget that puts taxes up further, which could mean that they've got a working majority to overturn the government's majority on the budget if they vote against it. So if they don't like what Jeremy Hunt is going to produce in the autumn, they're going to revolt.
Yes, I mean, interesting that the Tory conference hasn't even got going yet, and we've had a rebellion. And also, it's curious about what Liz Truss is actually up to. I mean, does she have some deluded idea she might be leader again or something like that?
It's deluded, but there has been a bit of a whisper that she does think she can come back and run for the leadership again if Rishi Sunak loses the next general election. Do you think that's fanciful? Well,
I think there's an awful lot of people in the queue at the moment. Right. We've got Suella Braverman, we've got Priti Patel, we've got Kemi Badenoch, and on the moderate side, Tom Tugendhat is there thinking about it. So
Penny Mordaunt.
Penny Mordaunt, of course, yes. So there's an awful lot of sort of leaders in waiting out there at the moment.
And generally, what do you think the mood of this conference is, Nigel? I said earlier to breakfast I thought it was quite make or break. I think Rishi Sunak's got a huge amount of pressure on him to deliver a great speech on Wednesday. I think they're still putting the finishing touches on that. He's actually thrown some red meat to the right in terms of this net zero climb down, but does he need to do more?
Yes, of course he does. I'm really curious about why he's holding back on giving us an announcement on HS2.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that might be a flourish in his own conference speech on Wednesday.
But it would be a weird flourish to be in Manchester basically saying, and we're not finishing HS2.
Or we are.
Okay.
He could come up and say we are, or we're not, but we're giving the money to various northern projects. I don't know. But it just seems a peculiar situation to start the conference with this question mark over whether HS2 will ever get to where we are.
Yeah, we'll be asking Michael Gove about that a bit later, because obviously he's the Levelling Up Secretary. And one might beg the question, how can you level up if you don't finish HS2 in the north? Let's talk about some of these interviews that the various cabinet ministers have given. Let's talk about Braverman versus Rocket Man, because she's basically taken on Sir Elton John. Is this a good idea from the Home Secretary?
Probably not. I mean, what she calls Elton John is part of an out-of-touch, pampered elite.
Are we in that, Nigel? I mean,
well, it depends where you stand and what Suella Braverman said last week in Washington.
So. Right.
But this pampered elite would presumably include the various Tory MPs who were horrified about her speech, especially the demonising of vulnerable women and gay people.
Yes.
And they've already complained to the Chief Whip.
Do you think it's dog whistle politics?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Nigel.
There was no need for that.
Is she not just channeling what people watching this show and listening to the show think, that actually the situation's out of control, that we've been far too generous, that our borders have been far too porous, and we need to get a grip of this situation? It's not inhumane. It's saying, look, crack down on illegal migration and make sure that legal migration works.
Yeah, I understand what she's getting at, and I do agree, in fact, it was worth going to Washington because you need an international debate on this.
Yeah.
Migration is a global problem. It can only really be solved globally. So that part I agree with her. Not when you start demonising the likes of LGBT migrants.
Well, is she doing that? Is she's trying to say, although to be fair, I think the statistics don't quite hold up on this.
No, they don't.
But there are some people who are claiming to be persecuted because of their sexuality, and actually that's not the case. We have heard from quite a few immigration lawyers. There's one in the Mail last week saying he reckons 70% of claims were spurious.
Well, OK, but it's still going to be a small number. I mean, you're talking about 75,000 asylum claims last year. year.
Yeah.
Of those, only 1,300 mentioned sexuality. Now, if a few of them were gaming the system, that's still not very many people. It's not like the idea that loads of people are coming over pretending to be gay to try and get into the country, because it is such a small number of people.
Was that a leadership pitch?
Yes, there's no question about it. I think that we've got all these leaders now queuing up, and Suella Braverman is one of them, which must make Rishi Sunak feel a bit uncomfortable. Because what they're saying is, look, election lost, we're now putting our ducks in a row to try and
well, you say election lost. The opinion polling in The Observer, which is more on your side of the ideological fence, let's say, is quite positive for the Tories, only 10 points behind. In the summer, they were as much as 27, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the polls have been closing, and probably I think you're right in what you said in your opening, that it's probably a lot to do with Rishi Sunak's climate change initiatives, or rather scrapping climate, the scrapping net zero targets.
So they just need to scrap IHT next, clarify whether or not a woman can have a penis, and they've won in 2024.
Yeah, I wish it was as easy as that. We both know politics doesn't work quite
well,
that way.
I don't know about that, Nigel. It seems to work like that as far as the headline writers are concerned. Let's talk about Shapps going on the defensive. What's he actually saying? He doesn't mean boots on the ground fighting in Ukraine, does
he? No, he doesn't. No, I mean, what Grant Shapps is talking about is we already trained 20,000 Ukrainian troops over here. And what he's talking about is sending our trainers to Ukraine. Trouble about that is it really would be a very dangerous thing to do just to have British troops inside Ukraine. There may be some special forces there, they've never confirmed it.
Yes.
But to have them there, because the way that Ukraine can go wrong is probably if there's an accident. It's something like Russian troops mistakenly crossing the border into a NATO country, say Poland.
Mistakenly shooting
down an aircraft or something like that. But those are the kind of mistakes that could escalate it. And I think the danger of putting people in, albeit trainers who are not there to fight, it's what happens if perhaps they do. It just seems to be that's one way of making the war escalate.
I mean, is this Shapps trying to flex his muscles? Because there was a little bit of doubt over him being given that defence role. He doesn't have any history in the military. He's had about 18 different jobs in cabinet. Maybe he's just trying to be punchy and a bit Ben Wallace-esque.
Yeah, I'm sure he is flexing his muscles, but I think that the important thing about Grant Shapps is that the overall policy on Ukraine has not changed.
Yes.
We are still foursquare behind Ukraine. That won't change under Grant Shapps any more than it changed under Ben Wallace. So I think that he's trying to show that this kind of support is just the way he's doing it increases the risk over there.
Yeah. Talking about people who are at the top normally of Conholm polls. So back in the day, Ben Wallace always used to come out on top when Tory voters and members were asked, who would you like to lead the party? The other person that's now on top is Kemi Badenoch. She's talking about the ECHR. I mean, this is again a bit of red meat being thrown to the right. She seems to be suggesting, and I'm intrigued because this is appearing in all of the different interviews, oh, we can't take it off the table. Just extrapolate that for people listening and watching, Nigel, because clearly all of these cabinet ministers have been fed a line about the ECHR, that they are trying to leave the door open to us leaving it.
Yes, I think we're being softened up for just that purpose. I mean, that's, again, part of what Suella Braverman was doing over in Washington last week, because she was raising the prospect of leaving the Refugee Convention. Now the European Court of Human Rights is in their sights. I think it would be a huge mistake to do something like that. We can't just start leaving international institutions because we don't agree with certain decisions. And where is our moral standing in the world if we do? If we leave ECHR, it puts us on a par with Russia and Belarus. And do we really want to be in that kind of club? But it does seem to me that we are nudging towards that. So all that has to happen is ECHR tries to block Rwanda, and they'll then pull us out.
Do you know what? A while ago, a long time ago, when Michael Fallon was still Defence Secretary, I remember having a conversation with him where he said we shouldn't leave the EU, we should just leave the ECHR. And actually, maybe that is the solution. Well, no, I mean from the perspective of, it's largely the Brexiteers calling for this. It's the right of the party saying the ECHR keeps on getting in the way, it keeps on thwarting what we want to do with our migrants. There are others who say, well, we can get around that. And actually, I think the mood music from Sunak is very much, well, the Supreme Court can have its ruling, but we're going to do what we want anyway, a little bit like with prisoner voting.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that the ECHR, we actually win more than half the cases that go before it. That we lose some, win some, but that's the point of having an international court.
Yes.
And what happens to countries who say have an ethical foreign policy and don't want to trade with us anymore?
Right, let's talk about Michael Gove, taking the Michael, I've said, because he's basically saying...
And isn't he just?
He's saying, he's having a go at Keir Starmer and saying, you know, where is he on net zero? Where is he on any of these issues? Which might be fair comment, but it's not exactly as if Michael Gove is some kind of, you know, eco-dove. He's an eco-hawk.
Yeah,
he's criticising himself here.
He is indeed, yes, but Michael Gove is very skilled at towing the line. So what he said before, he can always just sort of change slightly to accommodate whatever the current politics is.
Yeah, well, I'll be asking him about this because I'm confused now, because he was the one who said, absolutely not, we will not be delaying the petrol and diesel ban. And then suddenly, of course, Rishi Sunak has delayed it. So I'll ask him for his reaction to that. Might ask him a couple of questions about Boris, because he suggested in this piece in the Sun on Sunday that they're back on speaking terms and that they've had a long chat at an event.
We'd love to know what they're saying to each other.
I'll ask him. Nigel, just give me a final overview of this conference Wednesday. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak's in a stronger position now, certainly, than he was in the summer. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I think that what he's got to do is try and unite a party that seems determined to tear itself apart. If he can achieve that at this conference, I think he'll be pleased. When it comes down to the wider public, how many people actually are concerned about what happens at conference? We're talking about 13 years, a tired government.
Yes.
The idea of any big new ideas coming forward, I think, is unlikely. Uniting his party has got to be his first goal.
Tories in having to unite party shock is the headline from Manchester this morning from Nigel Nelson. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.